And good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for joining me this evening. Welcome once again to our Bhagavad-gita Satsang virtual webinar series. Very, very happy to see you. And if you are able to hear me, happy about it or not, please raise your hand just to make sure that audio is working properly. There we go. Thank you very much. It is very nice to see you. Jess, Mary, thank you very much. If you are new to this satsang, my intention is to offer you keys to unlock the secrets of the Bhagavad-gita that are actually secrets hiding in plain sight. If you are interested in learning about the Bhagavad-gita, you're hopefully in the right place. I myself have been reading the Gita for many, many years. And whether you have tried to read it or are attempting to read it or are trying to read it again or have read it many times, I hope that you will find something of value in this webinar series, something that will help deepen your relationship with this wonderful yoga wisdom text. Continuing with a little bit of housekeeping, as is our habit here. You can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options up in the right-hand corner. You don't need to worry about your microphone or your video camera because those are not in play on your end, only on my end. And there's a Q&A box down on the bottom. So you can, if you like at any time, ask a question and I will keep my eye on the Q&A box and see what you got for me. Last week, we spoke about consistent principles of spiritual life, unlimited varieties of reciprocation in the course of our spiritual journey between ourselves and Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita, who is directing our spiritual journey, how we model the behavior of the sadhus, what that behavior is, and the value of following in the footsteps of those who have traversed the path of yoga before us. We covered chapter 4, verses 10 through 15. This week, we're going to look at knowledge of action. We're going to get an explanation about the nature of action, undesirable action, unethical action, another way to think about it, and inaction. So action in inaction and inaction in action will be described. We'll also take a look at the life-changing magic of tidying up and how to burn up your karma. So this evening we are going to cover chapter 4, verses 16 through 23. Right? But first, the yoga vote. Did you know that there was such a thing as the yoga vote? It was news to me until this morning when I got some email from Citizen Summit letting me know that these group of prominent members of our yoga community and the spirituality and religion community and such like that are gathering together to speak about what we can do as yogis to influence our political situation here in America. So this will be a gathering of thought leaders, change makers, political and spiritual warriors. And the objective is to get organized and take back our power. I'm not sure that we had that power to take back, and I'm not sure who we are exactly, but there were some interesting ideas just in the email itself. First of all, that there are more registered yoga teachers in America than there are coal miners. I wasn't aware of that statistic. And just the sheer number of practitioners is such that as a voting bloc, the yoga mom could take the place of the soccer mom. I'm not sure that that constitutes a unified bloc, but I found the whole thing kind of curious, just the idea that there is a yoga vote. And I've actually been to some panel discussions and watched videos by the people who are leading this effort. And I've heard a lot of what they have to say. And I'm still wondering what exactly is spiritual about this particular kind of action. The general idea I've gotten is that action that is progressive is considered somehow connected to spirituality, and there's a rationale for that. And I agree personally, because my politics tend to be extremely progressive, especially for a guy who subscribes to a very traditional approach to yoga. But when I've had the opportunity to ask people who are involved in this sort of thing questions about where is the spiritual part, that is to say, the part that acknowledges the traditional teachings of yoga as a spiritual science of self-realization, it's not so much there. So despite my sympathizing with the objective in terms of establishing a progressive rather than regressive political agenda, which is my personal feeling, I also think that there's something missing, which is to say the sense of an objective truth around which a truly spiritual philosophy and spiritual values revolves. I'll be interested to see where this goes. And I bring it up because it's action. It's taking action. It's an action meant to take back our power. And I'm sure that this very powerful group of ladies who are heading this up and who are certainly acknowledging the demographics of yoga, that basically is 90% women, will have some very excellent ideas about how we can move forward in order to accomplish these goals. What I expect that will be missing is the genuinely spiritual part, because a particular set of liberal ideas as opposed to conservative ideas are still in the realm of the material. So let's go ahead and move forward and look at the translations for the verses that we're covering tonight, and let's see how they relate to this idea of political action or social action. And let's see what you think about how these verses apply or do not apply to that kind of engagement. So here we go. Bhagavad-gita chapter 4, text 16. Even greatly learned sages are perplexed by questions about what action and inaction are. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you will be freed from all misfortune. So once again, this is Krishna speaking to Arjuna. Text 17. The path of action is complex. Therefore, one should know how to make distinctions between ethical actions, iniquitous actions, and liberating actions. In human society, one who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is endowed with that power of discernment. Such a yogi remains situated in transcendence while engaged in all manner of activities. Text 19. Those who are wise say that one whose every endeavor is free from the motivation to enjoy the fruits of their endeavors is understood to be a sage whose reactions to their actions have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Text 20. Having given up all attachment to such fruitive results, ever satisfied and independent, one engages in inaction, even while engaged in all manner of activities. Text 21. Free from the desire to enjoy the fruits of actions, with mind and senses controlled by spiritual intelligence, having relinquished all sense of proprietorship over one's possessions, and acting only as needed to maintain the basic necessities of one's body, one remains free from sinful reactions. Text 22. Content with gain that comes of its own accord, unperturbed by duality or envy, accepting both success and failure with a steady mind, such a person is never entangled by reactions to the actions they perform. Text 23. For a liberated soul, who is thus situated in transcendental knowledge, free from attachment, whose every action is an act of sacrifice, all reactions to their actions are systematically vanquished. Last week I said we would go to verse 24. I changed my mind, as verse 24 itself requires a great deal of attention in order to be properly understood. And it begins a new segment of related verses there rather than concluding this set. So we're going to stop right there. If you have any questions about what you heard in the translations of the verses themselves, then by all means, go ahead and type something into the Q&A box, and I will take a look at that. While I anxiously wait for your questions, we will go back now and look at each verse individually and dig a little deeper into the verse. So again, the first verse of this set, chapter 4, verse 16 is, even greatly learned sages are perplexed by questions about what action and inaction are. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you will be freed from all misfortune. So if this topic is difficult for us, well, it's expected to be. Krishna states directly here that even people with great knowledge, transcendental knowledge, are still perplexed by this issue of what constitutes an action that should be performed, an action that should not be performed, an action that is a liberating action as opposed to an entangling action. You know, most of the time we have this idea that if we want to be liberated, then as yogis, we need to renounce the world, go off to the forest, live in a cave, sit and meditate, have nothing to do with anything. We don't take action to take back our power or get involved in any kind of affairs having to do with material existence. We think we're done with that. And yet here, we have this idea that you can act in the world and you're still doing yoga. And in fact, you can be liberated by acting. The interesting phrase here is freed from all misfortune. So earlier in this chapter, Krishna tells us that one who understands the transcendental nature of his appearance and activities does not, upon leaving one's body, return to this material world, but rather goes to him, enters into his spiritual nature, into his spiritual world. And we spoke about how you can take that literally, the place where Krishna hangs out, how you can take that symbolically as meaning acquiring the same qualities that Krishna has, or acquiring a transcendental nature that is like Krishna's, or both, because it's not an either-or situation, it's a both-and situation. So here, once again, we have yet another opportunity to be liberated, this time liberated from misfortune, simply by understanding the nature of action. So yet another way to do this. And by all misfortune, that has a couple of meanings. One meaning is the negative reactions to our previous actions, which is to say, bad karma. We can be liberated from reactions to actions we've already performed. The other meaning that we can understand is that misfortune is when we once again fall down in the cycle of birth and death to a life form where we do not have the opportunity to inquire as to the nature of our being. Sutras, such as the Yoga Sutras, Vedanta Sutras, all begin with the word now. And it's not just a casual now, it's an imperative now. It's a dramatic kind of now. And the implication is, now that you've done everything else, now that you've taken birth in every other kind of life you can take birth in, and now that you have a human form of life, you have this great opportunity. Don't mess it up. Take advantage of it by doing this thing that humans can do that beings in other life forms cannot do, which is make this inquiry as to what is the nature of my being, what is the truth of my existence. So the next verse, the path of action is complex, as we should expect it to be, considering that each action we take has a corresponding reaction that entangles us further or implicates us further in the material world. Much later on, in the 8th chapter, or is it the 9th? 8th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna will come back to this topic of karma and just ask directly, okay, explain it to me again, what is karma? And Krishna's response will be, karma is action that creates future births. In other words, future material bodies. So naturally, to understand the nature of action that in and of itself is so entangling, and of course it's going to be a complex topic. Therefore, one should know how to make distinctions between ethical actions, iniquitous actions, and liberating actions. So this is the application of buddhi, or discernment, long-term goal-directed intelligence, to the topic of action. being able to see the difference between an action that is going to bring about a fortuitous material result or proper action, an ethical action, an action that will bring about an unfortunate, undesired result. However much it may be satisfying in the short term, it will, in the long run, end up being a very sad state of affairs for us. And what is a liberating action? How can one act in such a way as to not generate any reaction whatsoever? Patanjali also thinks this is so important that he begins with ethics. The first limb of the 8-limb system of yoga, the Ashtanga yoga system, which, by the way, Krishna is going to segue into as we move from the 4th chapter into the 5th and 6th chapters, is ethical imperatives. Yamas, all the things having to do with how you act in the world towards others. So ethical action is emphasized in the yoga system of Patanjali, and now here in the section on karma yoga, how to act in such a way that your actions become yoga, here in the Bhagavad-gita. Iniquitous actions. Actions that bring about disharmony with nature. Actions that are contrary to the laws of nature. And that therefore bring about a discordant response from nature herself. This is understood to be a law of nature, and therefore not something that we can get around. And this is why Patanjali emphasizes that his ethical directives, his ethical guidance, universal, applicable in all times, all places, for all people, irrespective of their class. Nobody gets away with anything. The next verse is the verse that we are going to chant this evening. So I will once again share my screen with you. So this is verse 18 of the 4th chapter. I will chant the Sanskrit, and you will chant back if you like. I'll chant one line at a time, and then you chant each line back. For those of you who are new to the diacritical marks that come with transliterated Sanskrit, Sanskrit that is rendered in the Roman alphabet, dots under letters indicate that you're going to pronounce the letter further back in your throat, not just up by your teeth and lips. The accent mark over an S indicates an SH sound, but it's an SH sound all the way in the back of your mouth, as opposed to a dot under the S, which is a regular SH sound that we would normally use in English. A bar across the top of a vowel indicates a long open version of that vowel. The absence of such a mark indicates a short and somewhat more compressed enunciation of that same vowel. Okay, I think I've covered that. Here we go. Karmanya karmaya pashyad akarmani chakarmaya sabudhiman manusheshu sayukta kritsna karma krit. Well, I was wrong. I didn't cover everything. The dot under the H at the end of a word, at the end of a line, means you echo the vowel prior to the H back, as in the second line, yaha. We also pronounce each letter. So the third line has two D's in the second word, buddhiman, and the H is also pronounced. You put just a little bit of air underneath it. And I think that's what I missed. So we'll do it one more time. Here we go. I chant, you chant back. Oh, here's the other one I missed. The Y at the end of karmani, that might otherwise be an I, but in order to join the sound and create the right number of syllables for this particular cadence, that vowel becomes a Y and it leads directly into the next word. So it's almost as if the two words are one word. Okay, here we go. Karmanya karmaya pashyad. Akarmani chakarmayaha. Sabuddhiman manusheshu. Sayukta kritsna karma krit. All right. Here's our translation. In human society, one who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is endowed with such power of discernment. Such a yogi remains situated in transcendence while engaged in all manner of activities. So as you can see, the subject bullet point that I indicated for tonight was taking a direct quote from the Bhagavad-gita. Inaction, inaction, and action in inaction is endowed with the power of discernment. So let's take that apart a little bit. Inaction in action means that one who is acting and yet is acting in a particular state of mind with a particular intention is engaged in inaction insofar as there's no reaction. It is as if they have not acted, even though they are acting. Action in inaction. Simply to desist from action or to try to desist from action is not in itself liberating, which is to say, if you choose to do nothing, you have still made a choice, and there are things that should be done that perhaps now you are not doing, and therefore you still have the reaction associated with the neglect of an action that ought to be performed. In the case of Arjuna, Arjuna is thinking, I don't want to fight. And Krishna is saying, you have to fight, bud. Your choice of inaction will actually bring you a bad result. Just sitting on the sidelines, excusing yourself from the action, is itself an action that means you are relinquishing a duty that ought to be performed, and therefore you get what is essentially a negative bad reaction. So the failure to act when one should act brings about a karmic reaction. Such a yogi remains situated in transcendence while engaged in all manner of activities. So this is a really interesting idea. The idea that meditation can continue while one is engaged in an activity. Now, how do you do that? Well, that's what the next few verses are going to be about. So Let's go back to this group of verses. This is now text 19 again. Those who are wise say that one whose every endeavor is free from the motivation to enjoy the fruits of their endeavors is understood to be a sage whose reactions to their actions have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. So once again, we have this analogy of knowledge being like a fire that burns stuff up. In this case, knowledge and action informed by transcendental knowledge burns up reactions to actions. This is a totally far out idea. The idea that one doesn't just have to wait for your karma to come around. You can actually incinerate it. So let's think about this for a moment. According to the Bhagavad-gita, we have always existed. And we have been cycling through innumerable births and deaths, popping into the human form of life over and over and over again since time immemorial, generating karma, generating reactions to actions all this time. And there's just no telling what kind of reaction we have coming down the highway in our direction. Because if you think about, well, consider this. Remember what you were like 10 years ago. And now consider how much you have changed in those 10 years. How different are you now from the way you were 10 years ago? Now think 10 years from now. Odds are you'll be as different 10 years from now from what you are now as you are different now from what you were like 10 years ago. If we can change so much over a single lifetime, how much more so can we change over 10 lifetimes, 100 lifetimes? If you saw yourself 100 lifetimes ago, would you even recognize that person as being you? I'm betting I would not recognize the person that I thought I was 100 lifetimes ago as being the same person I am now. It's hard to imagine they would have the same progressive agenda and be curious about what it means to be part of the yoga vote. Anyway, the point is that who knows what I was doing when I was that person who I wouldn't even recognize as being myself 100 lifetimes ago, and who knows what reactions to the actions I was performing then might still be on the way for me. Well, why take chances? I'll just burn up those karmic reactions before they even get here. This is the mystic aspect of karma yoga. The idea that you can basically throw a flamethrower in the direction of karma that's on its way to you right now and burn it up before it gets here. And that's a good thing, because why take chances? At best, that action will oblige you to take yet another birth in the material world. And then who knows what you might do. I think that's way too risky a proposition, frankly. Okay, so every endeavor, in order for this to work, now remember, we were talking about how a yogi situated in transcendence remains situated in transcendence while engaged in all manner of activities if they understand how to act in such a way so that their action is equivalent to an inaction, which is to say they act in such a way that they don't generate a karmic reaction. So one whose every endeavor, like everything we do, is free from the motivation to enjoy the fruits of those endeavors. So that's the first qualification. Detachment from the desire to enjoy the fruits of our endeavors. And here's where we come back to the whole idea of social activism. What's your motivation? Do I want to change the political landscape of America because it'll be better for me, because I will like it better if it's different from what it is now? Or is there something higher than just what my subjective opinion of how things ought to be is? If I'm thinking I want to be the enjoyer of a society or a social construct of some kind, then this is not going to be a liberating action. I may get what I want, or I may not get what I want. But either way, it's not spiritual insofar as it's not a transcendental with freedom for motivation to be the enjoyer of the fruits of our actions. And that by itself is, well, I think that would be quite an attainment. It is extremely difficult to reach the platform of detachment from the desire to want to enjoy the results of what one does. So let's go a little further and see, how can that be possible? What can we do in order to get ourselves to the platform of genuine, authentic detachment from the desire to enjoy the results of our actions? If you have any ideas about how one might do that, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. Meanwhile, text number 20, having given up all attachment to such fruitive results, ever satisfied and independent, one engages in inaction, even while engaged in all manner of activities. So this is quite a proposition. It's not like there's one thing specifically that you have to do. There's all manner of activities, all manner of engagements that one can do. As long as you are detached from the desire to enjoy and you're satisfied with however things are or whatever it is you've got, and you are not dependent, which is to say, you are not dependent on the results of your activities for your happiness. So what kind of activities are we talking about? What can one do? Now we've got the project of developing detachment from the reaction, from the results of our actions, the desire to enjoy the results, developing a sense of contentment with whatever it is we've got right now, a state of independence, that is to say, the cultivation of an internal sustainable happiness that does not depend on external conditions. And therefore now we can engage in all manner of activities and remain in the transcendental position. Let's continue. 21. Free from the desire to enjoy the fruits of actions, with mind and senses controlled by spiritual intelligence, having relinquished all sense of proprietorship over one's possessions, and acting only as needed to maintain the basic necessities of one's body, one remains free from sinful reactions. In the past, we've talked about this word sinful, a loaded word insofar as we associate it with the idea of sin in Western religions. Here, sinful simply means bad karma. You'll get a bad reaction. A sinful action is an action that goes against the natural order of things and therefore generates an unfavorable reaction. So let's take a closer look at this idea of having relinquished all sense of proprietorship over one's possessions, acting only as needed to maintain basic necessities. So for thousands of years, commentators on the Bhagavad-gita have known this verse as the Marie Kondo verse. Giving up a sense of proprietorship over one's possessions. That is to say, unloading all the stuff that does not bring you joy. And in this case, we're talking about spiritual joy, or the sustainable happiness that one experiences from engaging in activity on the spiritual platform. So, here's your assignment. Go on a marathon of getting rid of stuff that doesn't bring you spiritual joy. If you declutter your life by relinquishing all the stuff that does not take you deeper into your spiritual life, that does not have some connection to acting on a transcendental platform, and you'll find it extremely liberating. We're going to come back to Ms. Kondo in just a moment. There's actually some really yogic stuff that I want to circle back to in just a few minutes. I don't know about you, but around here it's been raining a lot. Today was like the first truly sunny day that we've had in a while. And during a break in the rain yesterday, I went down to our garden. We have a garden plot and a community garden down the hill from our apartment building. And there was just a lot of stuff that needed to be done. And I very quickly harvested a lot of greens, and we had some kale and chard that needed to come up. And we have flowers also, marigolds and some other flowers there. And we have an altar, a sacred space in our home. So we grow the flowers not only to keep the tomatoes company, but also so we can cut flowers and bring them and put them on our altar as an offering to our Ishtadevata, that is the particular form of the Supreme Being that we feel we have a relationship with. And there's a picture of Radha and Krishna on our altar. And so we offer the flowers. And the kale and the chard and all the other greens and stuff we get from the garden, that's also something that we offer. So the action of tending the garden and harvesting the greens and bringing everything up, well, that's an action. It's also part of our spiritual practice because it's an action that is meant to be part of a cycle of sacrifice, which is to say, before we consume, any of these vegetables, that is to say, before we enjoy the fruits of our activities, we prepare something nice and make an offering of that food. And then we, after it's been offered, we take what we need in order to be satisfied, both in terms of our bellies and our taste buds. But this is an example of something you can do, an action that is actually inaction. Because if the idea of having a garden, growing food, growing flowers, etc., is to participate in this development of a relationship on the spiritual platform by making everything we do an offering, well, then there's no reaction to the action. And that's a really good thing, because gardening is a violent activity. I mean, I try to keep it to a minimum. I brought all manner of stuff up from the garden, and when I got into my kitchen, as I was sorting out all of the greens, I found a very little spider who had managed to hitch a ride. And so I tried to keep track of this very little spider, and I got a card and I got a little glass, and I managed to scoop the spider up onto the card and escorted the spider back down the elevator and outside to some place where I hope the spider will have better luck surviving for the natural lifespan of a spider than would have enjoyed in our apartment, where nothing's going on for spiders, really. So that was one in the plus column, because violence and the imposition of my life on some other creature's life should be minimized. You know, I don't want to unnecessarily disrupt the karma of another being. There was some other little bug that also hitched a ride I found later, and I tried to get him, but I couldn't. I don't know where he is. I don't know if he still is. By now, bug lifetimes in apartment buildings, often not all that long. But I feel, I feel guilty that I disrupted this bug's life. I feel bad about it. But I also have faith that because of the nature of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, my karmic reaction to disrupting the life of this bug will be minimized. And that's great, because actually I'm disrupting all kinds of living entities' lives in the course of having this garden. Anyway, I just offer that as an example of how I'm attempting to put these instructions into action that generates no reaction and is therefore an inaction. In action. Type something in the Q&A box if you have a question. Meanwhile, text 22. Content with gain that comes of its own accord. Unperturbed by duality or envy. So content with gain that comes of its own accord. This is also in one of the niyamas, contentment. And this is what is meant by contentment. Whatever comes of its own accord, we accept. Coming of its own accord means just by virtue of destiny, karma. I think I have to work very hard in order to make a living. And yet, I have a karmic destiny with regard to how much wealth I will enjoy in this life. And what I do right now may not have anything to do, may not have any effect on what actually happens in the next month, year, 5 years. My destiny is what it is. And therefore, there is some logic to accepting whatever comes of its own accord, because that's already been set in motion. Unperturbed by duality or envy. So, well, there's another living entity that I will have to escort out of here. That buzzing sound, that flapping sound that you hear on my light, we have a tree that we got from someone who had their tree in the backyard for years before we got it and brought it into our living room. And for the last 3 or 4 years, we discovered that there were cicadas actually buried in the dirt. And there's a very bright light in front of me, which is why I hope my webinar looks good. And that zizzing sound you may hear in the background, well, that's the cicada. Now he's looking right at me, sitting on the edge of the light, wondering, what the hell am I doing in this guy's apartment? Anyway, cicadas are surprisingly easy to catch. I thought we'd never really get that first one. I thought, how the heck are we going to do that? But actually, they're remarkably easy to catch. So when I'm done here, I will catch the cicada and escort the cicada outside. Unperturbed by duality, cicada or no cicada, either way. What this really means, however, is heat or cold, good or bad, like or dislike, or envy, not being bent out of shape because somebody has something that I wish I had. So this is an attitude to cultivate if we want to make progress in our spiritual lives. Accepting both success and failure with a steady mind. Hey, maybe the yoga vote will work. Maybe there'll be a blue wave. Maybe we'll all have democratic socialism. We'll all get what we want. Or not. Either way, steadiness in either condition is what we are interested in cultivating. Such a person is never entangled by reactions to the actions they perform. And then finishing up with text 53, for a liberated soul who is thus situated in transcendental knowledge, free from attachment, and whose every action is an act of sacrifice, all reactions to their actions are systematically vanquished. So this is the last element, which Krishna is now circling back to. Remember, in the 3rd chapter, he said, work for Vishnu must be performed. All your actions, whatever you eat, whatever you give away in charity, whatever you do, perform it as a sacrifice. So here we're circling back now to that idea of sacrifice. It's not just enough to be detached, and certainly it won't work if we are artificially detached from our actions. That just leads to spiritual bypassing, thinking, oh, I should be like this, but you're not actually like that. But there's got to be a process, a system that we can participate in that actually elevates our consciousness to the point where we can be like this. And that system is the system of making everything we do an offering to the highest truth. In our case, our Ishtadevata, the particular form of the Supreme Being, of Ishvara, that we feel like we have a relationship with. So that's the real key here. Every action, an act of sacrifice to something greater, something higher, whatever is your conception of the highest truth. That's who your actions are for. And as a result, all of one's actions are systematically destroyed, vanquished. Okay. Ms. Kondo, we'll see you again in just a moment. Tonight's program, knowledge of action. We spoke about action in inaction and inaction in action. That is to say, how renouncing action still will carry a karmic reaction by choosing not to act when action should be performed. There is a reaction. But inaction can be found in action when the action is performed in such a way as to not generate a karmic reaction at all. It is as if one has not acted in that sense. We spoke about how relinquishing our sense of proprietorship to the stuff that we're hanging on to that we don't really need, that doesn't actually engage us in actions that are spiritual, and how to burn up your karma. Okay. If you have any questions, then please ask your question. I'm looking forward to hearing them. If you don't have them right now, or if you are watching this after the fact, please send your questions to me at Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. Okay. Other resources, you can get Marie Kondo's book, as if she needs any help from me selling her book. But check out this quote. This is a quote from Ms. Kondo. But when we really delve into the reasons for why we can't let something go, there are only two: an attachment to the past or a fear of the future. These are two obstacles to yoga as found in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Attachment, and particularly attachment to the past, clinging to the familiar just because it's familiar, even though it's not coming back, it's long gone. Or a fear of the future. What does the future ultimately bring? Death. So fear of death or clinging to life. So here we have a clear connection to yoga with this idea of letting go of the stuff that we just don't need. Or the stuff that we don't need for the sake of pursuing our spiritual lives. My Thursday night plugs. I will be up in Cumberland, Maryland this weekend. Very happy to be returning there for a weekend immersion, sharing yoga philosophy. We'll be speaking about yoga philosophy and how to share it with students if you are a yoga teacher, how to share it with your friends if if you have friends and you would like to share that part of your life with them, which is sometimes not always easy to do if there's no shared frame of reference. That will be at the C. William Gilchrist Museum of the Arts in Cumberland this weekend, 28th and 29th. Mark your calendars, August 15th at 10 a.m. online at embodiedphilosophy.com/future. I will be taking part in a panel discussion along with Pranada Kamtwa, my friend and fellow author, on the future of the yoga teacher as a spiritual guide. So this will be a discussion with Jacob Kyle and the person who runs embodiedphilosophy.com. You can also find Embodied Philosophy on Facebook, but if you go to this particular URL, embodiedphilosophy.com, it's all one word, /future, you can reserve your spot to either listen to the panel discussion live or listen to it after the fact. And then finally, I'll be up in upstate New York at Yoga Mandali in Saratoga Springs for a workshop specifically for yoga teachers, integrating yoga philosophy into classes and workshops. So if you're up in the upstate New York area, I hope you'll join me for that. Next week, chapter 4, knowledge of sacrifice. So we left off with this idea of sacrifice, and now we're going to go into the details of varieties of sacrifice, techniques of sacrifice, and objectives of sacrifice. Verses 24 through 33 of chapter 4 will be discussed. And that's all, folks. I hope this has been a fun evening for you, or a fun time of day, whatever time of day you were watching this. Last call for questions. And like I said, if you have any comments or questions that you would like to ask after the fact, then please do so. Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. I'm always looking forward to hearing from you. And I am looking forward to seeing you next Thursday evening when we resume our webinars. All right. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening and rest of your week and rest of your life. And now I'm going to go save the life of that cicada. You're welcome, Mary. End meeting for all.